you think you know who's in the room with you. That's the first mistake. Not arrogance, just the natural assumption that forms when you've spent enough time around someone. You've watched how they behave. You've heard how they speak. You've built a model of them in your head, and that model feels accurate because it's been confirmed enough times that you stopped questioning it. What you've actually built is a model of their performance. And the performance is designed to confirm exactly what they need you to believe. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that everyone sees what you appear to be, but few truly experience what you are. He wasn't offering a lament. He was describing an operating advantage, available to anyone willing to learn how to use it. This isn't cynicism, it's mechanics. The same way a machine has visible parts and hidden parts, and the visible parts exist to keep you from understanding the hidden ones. Every person you interact with is operating on two levels simultaneously. One is for you, the other is for them. The gap between those two levels is where power lives. Most people never learn to read that gap. They take behavior at face value. They listen to what someone says and assume it corresponds to what that person means. They watch how someone acts in comfortable situations and conclude that's who they actually are. They mistake consistency for transparency. The result is that they keep being surprised. The loyal colleague turns. The agreeable person in the meeting votes against them when the door is closed. The trustworthy partner reveals an agenda they've been running for months, and every time, the same reaction. I never saw it coming. They never saw it because they were reading the wrong signal entirely. What this video covers is not a set of tricks for detecting lies. That framing is too narrow, and it misses the deeper mechanism. What you're going to understand, by the time this is over, is how people construct the image they project, what forces cause that image to fracture, where they reveal their actual priorities regardless of what they claim, and how to use the structure of conversation itself as a diagnostic instrument. This is how Machiavelli approached every court he entered, every prince he advised, every power structure he needed to navigate. Not with suspicion, with method, systematic observation, mapped against human incentive, calibrated across time. Before you can read anyone, you need to understand why the surface is unreliable, not occasionally, but structurally. Every person you interact with is engaged in what sociologists call impression management, the continuous, largely unconscious process of shaping how they appear to others. The concept was developed by Erving Goffman in his 1959 work on social interaction, and it describes something far more universal than deliberate performance. It is the basic operating system of social life. People present versions of themselves that they believe will produce the outcomes they want: approval, trust, status, safety, opportunity. The presentation is calibrated to the audience. What this means in practice is that the person sitting across from you is not showing you themselves. They are showing you a theory, their theory of who you need them to be in order for this interaction to go the way they want it to go. This is not malicious, it is adaptive, but it means that everything you observe under normal social conditions is filtered. It has been selected. It has passed through the internal question: does this serve me? Machiavelli saw this operating at every level of Florentine political life. Ambassadors, courtiers, and princes all presented themselves according to what the situation demanded. What distinguished the powerful from the naive was not that the powerful were suspicious of everyone. It was that they understood the mechanism. They knew they were receiving a performance, and they learned to read the performer, not the performance. The first principle of reading anyone is to stop evaluating the content of what they show you and start evaluating the architecture of how they show it. Ask different questions, not "is this person trustworthy?" That question leads straight into confirmation bias, where you unconsciously gather evidence that confirms the belief you already hold. Instead, ask, what is this person trying to get me to conclude about them, and why? What response are they engineering? What outcome does their presentation serve? That reframe changes everything you observe. Consider how people introduce themselves in a new professional environment. Most will emphasize specific achievements, use particular language, align themselves with respected figures or ideas. None of that is random. It is a series of calculated signals designed to produce a specific impression. The question isn't whether the information is accurate. It might be entirely true. The question is, what impression is being optimized for? And what does that tell you about what this person needs? Someone who immediately establishes their credentials needs to be perceived as competent, which usually signals uncertainty that they'll be seen that way without help. Someone who tells you immediately who they know is using association as a proxy for a position they're not confident standing in alone. Someone who deflects questions about themselves back onto you and demonstrates intense interest in your perspective is managing the dynamic, not expressing curiosity. The signals are always there. Most people miss them because they are responding to content, to what is being said, rather than to pattern, which is how it is being said, and gap, which is what is conspicuously absent. The gap is frequently the most important signal of all. What a person never mentions, what topics they smoothly redirect away from, what questions they answer with a slightly different question. These absences are as diagnostic as anything they voluntarily offer. Omission is a choice. It happens beneath conscious awareness much of the time, but it is never random. People omit what they want to protect. From scrutiny, from comparison, from challenge. Start cataloging the omissions in the people around you, not obsessively, methodically. Over time, the pattern of what someone never addresses becomes one of the clearest maps of their actual psychology. You can only navigate a relationship accurately when you understand its full topography, including the parts that don't appear on the surface map. Normal social conditions are not information-rich environments. They are controlled environments. In normal conditions, people have time to manage their presentation, regulate their reactions, and maintain the version of themselves they've decided to project. What you get under normal conditions is the performance at its most polished. Pressure strips that away. This is consistent with one of Machiavelli's most persistent analytical frameworks across the Prince and the Discourses on Livy, evaluating people not by how they behave in stability, but by how they respond when stability collapses. In the Discourses, he writes in Book 1, Chapter 3, that men never do good unless necessity drives them to it, and that compulsion, not intention, is what reveals character. Drawing from his reading of Roman history, where the pattern of men behaving well under scrutiny and reverting under pressure was relentlessly documented, what can be inferred is that Machiavelli treated pressure as a clarifying force. The condition under which the constructed version of a person becomes too costly to maintain. The comfortable version of a person is the curated version. The pressured version is the real one. What does pressure look like in ordinary interactions? It doesn't need to be dramatic. Pressure is any situation where someone's interests are threatened, where something they want is in question, where a comfortable assumption is challenged, or where they are asked to respond faster than their management mechanisms can compensate for. Watch for these moments. They appear constantly, if you're looking. When a plan someone proposed gets challenged in a meeting, watch how they respond. Do they engage the criticism analytically, or do they become immediately defensive? The defensive response tells you something precise. Their ego is more invested in being right than in finding the best outcome. That is critical information about how they will behave in any situation where their judgment is questioned. It will happen exactly the same way every time. When something goes wrong in a shared project, observe where attention is redirected, toward analysis of what happened, or toward establishing that it was not their fault. The fault displacement reflex is one of the most reliable indicators of how someone actually operates under pressure. It tells you they will prioritize self-protection over problem-solving, consistently. Knowing that before you depend on them is worth considerable effort. When someone is genuinely caught off guard, their first few seconds are considerably less managed than everything that follows. Paul Ekman's research documented what he termed micro-expressions, involuntary facial movements lasting from 1/25th to 1/5 of a second, which surface before conscious suppression can complete. He found these to be non-conscious and not subject to voluntary control. It should be noted that detecting true micro-expressions in real time is difficult without training. Ekman himself acknowledged that untrained observers struggle to catch them reliably. What the broader research on this supports, however, is the simpler observation. The first unmanaged moment of response, the initial body orientation, the flash before the words assemble, is more honest than anything said afterward. Pay attention to the first second before the managed answer begins to form. There is a simple practice for developing this. In conversations where you want genuine information, say something that creates mild stakes, a mild challenge, a mild contradiction of what they've said, a mild reframe of their position. Then stop talking entirely. What happens in the next 3 to 5 seconds will tell you considerably more than anything they say in the 30 seconds that follow. The recovery also matters. How someone returns to composure after being caught off guard reveals their hierarchy of actual priorities. Someone who acknowledges the disruption and engages openly has a level of security that isn't dependent on controlling how they're perceived. Someone who immediately rebuilds the presentation, restates their original position more forcefully, deflects with a counter-question, changes the subject, is operating from a place where being seen a certain way is essential to their function. That dependency is information. You now know what this person needs. You know what threatens them. You know what they will protect at the expense of other things, including honesty and accuracy, when the pressure is real enough. Build pressure deliberately, carefully, and infrequently. Not as a test designed to expose people, but as a calibration tool, so you understand what you're actually working with before the stakes are real. When someone gives you a reason for their behavior, they are almost never giving you the actual reason. They are giving you the most socially acceptable version of the actual reason, the version that positions them well, that makes the behavior look reasonable or even admirable, that invites your agreement rather than your scrutiny. This is not always deliberate. People rationalize their own motivations as automatically as they breathe. The real driver is usually simpler and less flattering than the explanation offered. Social psychologists call this motivated reasoning, the tendency to first arrive at the conclusion you want, and then construct the justifications that make the decision appear principled. The concept was rigorously developed by the psychologist Ziva Kunda in her landmark 1990 paper published in Psychological Bulletin, where she demonstrated that people don't reason toward conclusions so much as they reason in defense of conclusions they've already privately reached, selectively accessing beliefs and evidence that support the preferred outcome. By the time someone is explaining their choice to you, the choice has already been made on grounds that often have nothing to do with the explanation. The explanation is a construction built around the decision after the fact. It is the story, not the cause. Stop analyzing explanations. Map incentives instead. Incentive mapping is simple in principle and requires patience in practice. For any person you want to understand, answer 3 questions. What does this person want most in this environment? Status, security, belonging, control, recognition, freedom from accountability. What does this person most want to avoid? Exposure, conflict, being outcompeted, losing relevance. And what does this person consistently move toward, regardless of what they say they value? That last question is the most important, because behavior is the only honest data source available to you. What someone repeatedly chooses, across different circumstances, different levels of stakes, different amounts of observation, is the clearest possible expression of their actual hierarchy of priorities. Everything they say about their priorities is secondary to this. Machiavelli was explicit about this structure in The Prince. He argued that men, when their self-interest is genuinely threatened, will act in defense of that interest regardless of loyalty pledged or friendship declared. His observation wasn't a counsel of despair. It was a practical framework for avoiding the mistake of taking declarations at face value while ignoring the incentive structure underneath. Apply this in practice. Someone tells you they value honesty above all else. Track the situations where honesty would cost them something, where being honest would mean admitting a mistake, sharing credit they'd prefer to keep, or acknowledging something inconvenient about their own performance. Does the stated value hold in those conditions, or does something else consistently win? Someone tells you they have no interest in a particular position or opportunity. Watch where their attention goes when that topic comes up in conversation. Watch whether they surface it themselves in contexts where it isn't relevant. The claimed indifference and the behavioral pattern are frequently dramatic opposites. Someone tells you they are not competitive. Watch how they react when someone in their peer group succeeds at something they haven't yet achieved. The reaction comes faster than the management mechanism. Incentive mapping also works prospectively. Once you understand someone's actual driver structure, you can anticipate their behavior in situations that haven't happened yet with significant accuracy. Not because people are simple, because their drivers are consistent, even when their surface behavior varies. This is the most practically powerful application of reading people. Not just understanding who someone is in the present moment, but building a model accurate enough that you are never genuinely surprised. You understand the forces that move them, independent of what they tell you those forces are. Incentives don't lie. Write that somewhere you'll actually see it. Most attention, when reading people, goes to the dramatic signals, expressions, body orientation, overt behavioral tells. These are real and worth studying. But the most consistently underused diagnostic tool is language itself. Not what people say, but precisely how they construct it. The words someone chooses when they're not being careful are extraordinarily revealing, and people are rarely as careful as they believe they are. One of the most consistent patterns is what linguists call distancing language, the shift from first person to third person or passive constructions when describing something the speaker is uncomfortable owning directly. Mistakes were made. Things got complicated. The situation developed in a way that... Compare this to the language people use for outcomes they want to claim. Clear first person, active construction. I built this. I made that decision. I turned it around. The asymmetry between how someone takes credit and how they distribute blame is one of the clearest windows into their actual relationship with accountability. Consistent passive construction around failures is not stylistic. It is psychological. It signals that this person's self-image cannot absorb responsibility directly. That same fragility will appear every time something goes wrong. It is not a one-time tell. It is a pattern. Pay attention to what people disclaim before they've said anything. When someone opens with, "I'm not trying to be critical, but," or "this is probably nothing, but," they are managing your anticipated reaction before you've had it. That management means they already know the content is something you won't receive well, which means they already know more about the situation than they're presenting. The disclaimer is a tell. Follow what comes after it with more attention than you would have given otherwise. Watch for sudden shifts in tense. Someone describing a current relationship or ongoing situation might slip unexpectedly into past tense. She was always the one who, when the person is still present in their life. Past tense applied to something present signals cognitive distance. They have already internally separated from the thing they're describing, even if externally they haven't acted on it yet. The language has moved ahead of the narrative. Deception researchers, including Aldert Vrij at the University of Portsmouth, have documented across multiple studies that managing a false or carefully constructed account tends to demand more processing resources than straightforward truthful recall. Response times slow, verbal fluency decreases, and over-elaboration on peripheral details tends to appear. This body of research has its ongoing debates and should not be read as a simple checklist, but the pattern it points toward is useful. When someone is working harder than the situation seems to require, speaking more slowly than usual, pausing in unexpected places, hedging statements that don't need hedging, the extra processing has a source. Finding that source is worth the effort. Machiavelli's diplomatic correspondence survives extensively in historical archives. His collected Legazioni, the official dispatches he sent while serving on diplomatic missions for Florence between 1498 and 1512, show a diplomat who paid as much attention to the texture of communication as to its content. In those dispatches, he tracks how figures like Cesare Borgia and Pope Julius II expressed themselves in moments of uncertainty, noting the hesitations, the sudden subject changes, the declarations of confidence about things that were, from Machiavelli's independent knowledge of the situation, not settled at all. He understood that how someone said something was frequently more informative than what they said. Based on what we know of how he operated from those dispatches, he appears to have treated language not as information delivery, but as evidence, a record of what the speaker needed you to believe, and by implication, what they were working to conceal. There is a specific diagnostic technique worth building into your practice. In any substantive conversation, track whether the other person describes absent third parties using trait-based language or behavior-based language. Trait-based: he's dishonest. She's selfish. He can't be trusted. Behavior-based: he told me X when the actual situation was Y. She took credit without acknowledging anyone else. He committed to it and withdrew when it cost him something. People who consistently default to trait-based descriptions of others are engaged in a different cognitive process. They are categorizing, placing people into fixed containers. Social psychology research suggests this style of thinking is associated with greater rigidity in updating beliefs. Once a judgment has been encoded as a property of a person, rather than a conclusion drawn from observed behavior, contradicting evidence tends to be filtered rather than integrated. The person has decided what you are. New data doesn't easily revise it. This matters because people who reason about others this way also reason about you this way. What category have they placed you in? And what would actually be required to reclassify you in their mind? Understanding how someone thinks about others is the most direct window into how they are thinking about you. There is a moment in almost every conversation where the other person has finished what they intended to say and is waiting for your response. Most people respond immediately. The rhythm is maintained. Everyone stays comfortable. That comfort is what you should be disrupting. Silence applied deliberately after someone has finished speaking, is one of the most powerful diagnostic instruments available, and it costs nothing. Its effects are almost entirely predictable. When you do not fill the silence, the other person fills it. And what they add in that moment, the elaboration, the sudden qualifier they didn't include in their original statement, the clarification nobody asked for, is almost always more revealing than what they said when they were in control of the flow. The reason connects to what psychologists call the need for cognitive closure, the drive to eliminate ambiguity in social situations, documented extensively by Eric Kruglansky in his work on epistemic motivation. Most people cannot sit comfortably in conversational silence with someone they're trying to manage or impress. The discomfort produces words. Those words, generated under mild pressure, without the preparation of the original statement, are less filtered. They reveal more. This is not a manipulation tactic. It is a structural feature of human communication that almost nobody exploits because they are too focused on formulating their own response to let the other person complete their actual transmission. Practice this in low-stakes conversations first. Ask a question. Receive the answer. Then say nothing for 4 to 5 seconds. Maintain neutral, attentive presence. Watch what happens next. The additional information will often surprise you. People will tell you things in the silence filler that they would never have included in a prepared answer. The technique compounds when paired with questions that establish premises. Questions that presuppose something force the answerer to either accept the premise or explicitly reject it, and the choice of whether to push back or accept is itself diagnostic. A question like, "How long have you felt that way?" presupposes that they feel a certain way. Whether they correct the premise or let it stand tells you whether your read on their actual position is accurate. Questions that invite retrospective assessment. Looking back, what was the actual turning point? Shift someone out of their managed present tense framing into a more reflective mode, where the story they've constructed is partially disassembled in favor of actual memory. Memory is less managed than current narrative. What someone recalls spontaneously under a retrospective frame is closer to what actually happened than what they've packaged for current consumption. Machiavelli's Legazioni offer a consistent picture of a negotiator who used patience as a structural tool. Across multiple dispatches, particularly those from his missions to Cesare Borgia in 1502 and to the court of Julius II, he describes sessions where he said little and allowed the other party to keep talking, treating the extended conversation itself as an information-gathering operation rather than an exchange. What those dispatches suggest, based on how he describes his own conduct, is that he understood silence not as absence, but as a kind of pressure, a condition that made the other person responsible for filling the space, and that tended to produce more than the other person had planned to give. One final element. The question you choose not to ask is sometimes more powerful than the question you do ask. When you are known to pay close attention, your decision not to pursue an obvious thread sends a signal of its own. It tells the other person that you noticed and chose not to address it. That signal creates pressure by itself. People frequently address the unasked question themselves in subsequent conversation, simply because they're aware it's sitting there. If the person you're talking to is already wondering what you know, they are already off balance. You haven't said a word. Reading people accurately is not the same thing as acting on every read. This distinction matters more than most people realize. The purpose of understanding someone's actual psychology, their incentive structure, their pressure points, their communication patterns, their omissions, is not to gain tactical advantage in individual interactions. That is a narrow application, and it produces a specific kind of person. Someone who is always maneuvering, always calculating, and eventually always isolated, because people sense the constant machinery beneath the surface, even when they cannot name what they're sensing. The purpose is orientation. It is knowing the actual terrain, so that your decisions are made in contact with reality rather than with the performance that reality has been dressed in. Machiavelli's deeper argument in The Prince, beneath all the tactical discussion of managing enemies, handling alliances, and projecting power, is that the prince who survives is the one who sees clearly. Not the most aggressive, not the most ruthless, the one with the most accurate map of the world. He is actually operating inside. Clarity about the nature of people and institutions is what allows for decisions that hold across time and across changing circumstances. What you do with an accurate read depends entirely on the relationship and the situation. In some cases, it means adjusting your communication to get a better outcome for both parties, understanding that this person responds better to direct acknowledgement of their concerns than to logical argument, and using that knowledge to reach the result you both actually want. In some cases, it means recalibrating your trust and your exposure, understanding that this person's incentives diverge from yours at specific pressure points, and adjusting your dependency accordingly. In some cases, it means doing nothing visible, simply holding the information, allowing it to inform your decisions while the other person remains unaware that you can see the structure beneath their presentation. The last application is frequently the most powerful over time. The advantage of understanding someone who does not know you, understand them, compounds. You can anticipate. You can position. You can allow situations to develop in directions that they would have redirected if they knew what you were observing. This is not engineering someone's behavior against their interests. It is strategic awareness. It is the difference between navigating a landscape with an accurate map and navigating it blind, responding to what the terrain presents rather than anticipating what lies ahead. There is, though, a cost to developing this level of perceptual precision. The same mechanisms that let you read other people accurately will eventually direct themselves inward. Are your stated reasons for your own behavior the actual reasons? Do your incentives align with your declared values in every situation, or only in the comfortable ones? Where do you use the same distancing language you now know to track in others? Where do your omissions live? That question is not comfortable, but it is the necessary endpoint of this kind of thinking. Because the person who can read anyone accurately, but cannot read themselves, has built a sophisticated map of the external world while remaining lost inside their own. The sharpest version of this knowledge points inward as consistently as it points outward. Everyone around you is operating with a psychology they mostly cannot see. You have been doing the same. The difference, from this point forward, is that you know what to look for, in them and in yourself. That is what separates the person who watches the game from the person who finally understands it. Stop watching. Start seeing. If this changed how you rid the people around you, hit like and subscribe for more content on psychology, power, and strategy.